Welcome to Georgia Estate Law Explained.
Welcome to the show where we bring clarity to estate and family law in Georgia. I'm Sophia Morellis, and I'm here with attorney Stephen Scriber, founder of Scriber Law Group. Each episode, Stephen breaks down the legal issues that matter to most families, from protecting your legacy to planning for life's transitions. If you've ever wondered where to start or how to make the right legal choices for your family, you're in the right place. Today, we're discussing estate planning for blended families. Welcome back, Stephen.
Oh, thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about this, being part of a larger blended family myself. I've seen some of the politics. So, what are some of the unique challenges that blended families face when it comes to estate planning?
Oh, yeah. And I say as not a blended family. I got married when I was 30, and I already had a ton of stuff. I was like joking. I was like, I wish someone would come and take half our stuff away. Blended
You should have had that. Should have had that first wife in the divorce. That would have taken care of it.
I was like the opposite of like wedding gifts. I was like, come and take half of our things away. Take a set of cookware away. But so blended families have like a dynamic, but like that, but with people. So if and this often happens. I mean, I guess all over the range. So it's not even age specific, but as people have kids either from prior relationships, whether or not they were married, but they come to the relationship with their own assets, their own children, their own any responsibilities. I don't know, dogs, cats, anything that they are responsible for. And they're blending it with a second person's. It creates some potential issues upon death or incapacity. So one of the things that we want to make sure is that at a minimum, the stuff that you brought to your relationship goes to the people that you intended to leave it to at your death. So this is stuff where if you got divorced, each of you would take your own stuff with you. But
Right.
upon death, it may get split up in a different way. And you may want to leave it in a different way. Like, I don't know, if spouse A, all their kids are doctors or well-to-do people, and the spouse B's kids are teachers and social workers, maybe you all had the conversation like, hey, maybe we want to leave more of it to spouse B's kids. But you want that to be a thought-out intention and not an accident of fate.
Yeah, exactly. Or there's a child perhaps with a mental
Oh yeah, any special
disability
needs
or
that might
yeah,
need more money for
exactly.
their care. Yeah. So if one
Yeah.
child has like a Downs or some side of intellectual disability or is physically unable to work, you may want to leave more money in a trust for that child to pay for their care. Like if that child's 30 years old and will still in their 30, 40, 50 years, you want to that is a conscious thing you want to take care of. So
Yeah.
and so that's a big challenge, and add to that additional part of the challenge is that most people still don't have prenuptial agreements, so it's not written out ahead of time.
Mm.
So you at that point it may have to be addressed through your estate plan.
Right, right. Yeah, I could see that. And how how granular can you get?
You
Say
get very
you
granular.
say you bought a house with your second wife, but you've got, certain things you want to go to the first set of kids and different things that you want going to the other kids, and you don't want your spouse, for example, to be booted out of the house, right? But you want the value of that house to go to the kids or something like that. How do you start to negotiate those sorts
Oh
of
yeah,
things?
and you're probably hitting on one scenario like, hey, spouse A and B get married. This is their second marriage, but spouse A happens to own the house, and spouse B moves in with them. So, and spouse A may have purchased the house 40 years earlier during a prior relationship, and spouse A's kids assume that, hey, upon spouse A's death, we will get the proceeds of the house. But they also don't want a scenario where spouse B is homeless or they sold their house and they went out on a
Yeah,
limb and they're left in a lurch. So
right.
one thing that can be set up is a trust that holds upon, say, spouse A dies first. The house can certainly be held in trust for spouse B's lifetime, and in some ways that's advantageous to spouse B because the nature of that trust can also shield that house from spouse B's Medicaid if they ever need nursing home care or long term care, or for that matter, if they have any judgments, if they rear end someone, could have a lawsuit or something like that. It can shield that house from spouse B's creditors. And then upon the death of spouse B, whether that death is 6 months later or 30 years later, the house can then be sold and divided in some agreed upon manner. So that maybe it goes back to spouse A's children. Maybe it is split between spouse A's and spouse B's children in some agreed upon way. Because spouse B may have sold the house and then, but may have sold their house to move with spouse A, but maybe spouse B then paid for a new roof and renovated the kitchen and spent a lot of money on the house, so that kind of washes out. So you want everyone to be accommodated in there. Or maybe spouse A and B are like, we paid for all these things for our kids. They're all great. Let's give all the money to our colleges, our humane society, whatever type of charity, nonprofit, church that they agree to leave it to. And the kids just need to implement it and call it a day. So whatever is agreed upon, it's easier to do that if you plan it ahead of time.
So, what are some common sources of conflict that you see, particularly in blended families, and how can good planning help prevent those?
The step parent step child probate dispute has probably kept the probate industry in business as far as litigation for generations. So usually, assuming that women outlive men, let's say a couple has adult children, the husband dies, the wife remarries. I don't know. I'll call it the pool boy. She is like, I'm gonna have fun now. I don't care. So she marries the pool boy, but then she later passes, and now the kids and the pool boy are now fighting over this estate. The pool boy says, "I should get everything," and the kids say, We should get everything." And much money is spent, and ultimately it'll probably be distributed in some allocation.
Yeah,
Um,
and a lot of it to lawyers as opposed to either the pool boy or the kids.
yeah, exactly. Lawyers, judges will have to know your family's business against their will, because most probate court judges are actually very kind people, but they're also like, we have to implement the law here. So
Yeah.
while someone might be more sympathetic to someone else, we still have to follow the rules that the state has given us. But a lot of tears or anger has been expressed over that kind of process. Then the other ones also between siblings, more commonly. Um, a property is left to some children. There might not be any will, so the surviving spouse dies. They have children. The children all fight each other in court over who should get what, and that's also pretty potentially expensive and frustrating. And good planning could resolve both of those issues, because as long as you know, like if someone came to my office and said, "Hey, I'm part of a blended family," um, and so I can ask them, "Hey, what are the biggest concerns?" And
Mhm.
they say, "Hey, to make sure spouse stays in the house." Okay. To make sure kids get everything upon death, the second spouse. Okay. And make sure that everyone doesn't go to court. Fine. So we're gonna have all the stakeholders, express their fears, their concerns to their parent, to our sibling, spouse ahead of time, so that they can all be heard and accommodated to the extent that the person wants to accommodate them.
Right.
Yeah, and so we can, but a trust, some type of beneficiary designations, other things can be put in place. Like you can decide, hey, I'm going to leave this house to my spouse, but I'm going to set up a life insurance policy that gives my kids some money, so everything evens out. But as long as you've thought about that ahead of time and everyone understands what will then happen, everyone can shake hands and go on with their life on that part. Because the last thing you really want is you spend all your life accumulating stuff or planning for things, and then the grieving process, your memory is kind of marred by this dispute over stuff that's at one level is kind of replaceable, another level is not replaceable at all. So
Right. Yeah, because some of it has strong sentimental value.
exactly.
So when we're looking at the blended family, how do like prenuptial and or postnuptial agreements factor into estate planning in this circumstance?
So they can play a significant factor potentially. So a lot of prenup, postnup agreements, each spouse agrees to say, "Hey, I don't want any part of your estate." So because a lot of times they might come from their own independent backgrounds, they're economically relatively similar. And in that case, they may say, "Hey, we're good. We're gonna write ourselves out of each other's estate plans." Um, like for example, my grandmother, after she divorced my grandfather in the 50s, so she had been single for like 40 years before she died, but she had a long term partner. She never got married again. She's like, I don't need that stress in my life. Um, but if they had gotten married, they would have had a prenup where they essentially had everything side by side, and then when each of them passed, they left everything to their kids. Um, Everyone was fine with it, and no feelings were hurt.
Yeah.
Um, and so, and at another level, though, if there's some sort of level of economic incompatibility, like in the sense that one spouse is wealthier than the other, um, like if a parent dies, they have adult children, they marry a younger second spouse. I personally don't, whatever, it's not judgment zone, but they might not have as many assets. Then you might have
Right.
to talk about that in your prenup, saying, "Hey, what are we going to do? Are you going to give like a you might agree to give some amount of money to offset it. You might agree to say, hey, I'm going to address this in my will or trust." Um, you can put any type of thing in there, and it's actually more preferential to have it in that agreement because you've negotiated out. You've probably have both consulted with counsel,
Right.
and you have the strength of going in there with the full knowledge of what you plan to do, and then your trust in your will and stuff like that can then integrate in that prenuptial or postnuptial agreement, depending on when you get it, to minimize any discrepancy and conflict. Because you want to make sure they're all in sync with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The worst thing to do is have a lawyer A do your prenup, lawyer B do your estate planning, and lawyer A and B don't know about each other.
Exactly. Or the prior agreement.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So definitely, if you can forget estate plan, bring in your prenup. Your lawyer will almost certainly ask you about it, but if they're not, bring it up early.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a prenup, how, tell us about this postnuptial thing. This is
So
kind of a newer
postnuptial.
concept to me.
Oh yeah, and it's pretty along the same line. So postnuptial agreement, each side can hire their own. Typically has to hire their own attorney because ad it's it's for purposes of this adversarial, even if you want to agree to something. Um,
Mhm.
but you can agree saying, hey, if we get divorced, this is how I want to allocate our assets. And you can extend that to death, to incapacity, to any other scenario that's saying, hey, we want to handle things in this certain way between the two of us financially. Or
Right.
with allocating real estate, it's like, hey, I waive my interest to house A, to house one, but the other spouse waives their interest to house two. Um, if you came in with each of you having your own houses, to kind of allocate those things out. And more particularly, this is less of an issue in states like Georgia, but if you're in a community property state, you can also help clarify those things because sometimes estate plans can't reach into community property, whereas a prenuptial agreement or postnuptial agreement can. So
Ah,
if you want that to apply to your estate as well, and not just a divorce and stuff like that, you can further contract that out. More writing is better than less writing as long as it's all consistent, and
yeah.
more understanding is better than less understanding. But you can anyone but under Georgia law, anyone at any time of marriage can get a postnuptial agreement if you want to sit down and have an agreement with your spouse. But if you just want to do it for estate planning, you can just jump straight to having a trust or anything like else along those lines as well.
Okay, beautiful. So, what advice do you give clients who feel uncomfortable having what are potentially tough family conversations?
The advice I would tell, I mean, you don't have to have the conversation, but I would strongly recommend it because if you don't have this talk now, they're gonna have this talk later, and you won't be there for it. So
Yeah.
you can handle it however you'd like. You can. I typically, since the client knows everyone, they can handle a conversation in the most sensitive way possible for each person. So if they know that one child has a different personality than another, in a sense that they'll handle certain news different, like who am I going to appoint as my trustee or my executor and stuff like that, and why, it's better to have that talk now. Especially, this is a little bit to the side of asset stuff, but stuff like medical planning, um, like wishes about life support, DNR, and stuff like that. Those are talks you want to have with your children or your spouse or everyone else. Immediately, it's not a happy topic, but if you have that talk, it's saying, "Hey, if I'm sick, I want you to do this." It's way and here's the writing that shows that. It's a lot easier to have that talk than to let that linger, because
Yeah.
just because you're avoiding it doesn't mean it's not happening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Well, and it's so much nicer to have something in writing. When my grandmother had her stroke and then eventually passed away, there was this period of time where Dad was kind of left holding the bag. His other siblings didn't want to talk about the situation, didn't want to have to deal with the questions the doctors were asking about, well, do we give intravenous fluids? Do we put her on a heart and lung machine? What do we do? Do we withdraw feeding and support? And I can remember he was just torn apart with these conversations, and the other siblings didn't want to engage or participate, and so it was left on him.
And these conversations are often worse than the conversations about stuff.
Yes.
It's a lot easier to tell people, "Hey, I'm giving this person 60/40 versus forcing people to talk about getting sick and dying. A lot of
Yeah.
people really want to avoid that. So to the extent that you can even tell them, I would advise a client, if your kids or your spouse don't want to talk about it, you at least need to have a decision has been made conversation about your estate plan. Like, I've made this decision about what I want to do, and like with a medical directive, I filed it in my medical records. My doctor knows about it, so they're gonna make sure it's implemented, if nothing else. Same for my will
Hmm.
and trust and stuff like that. I've While you may not want to talk about it, I've completed it with my attorney, so you can talk with my attorney about it. But you want to leave the door
Right.
always open to that conversation. Because I don't think I think in the right context, you can get most people to eventually come to a one about estate planning. You may have to talk with them individually. You may have to pin them at Thanksgiving. You may have to have a group conversation to get them to stay at the table. But once you have that conversation, it's been had, and you don't have to have it again necessarily unless something's changed.
Right. Well, and I think even if you can't handle the really difficult conversation with the family, at least giving them some direction. It's like, there is a plan, you can find it here.
Exactly.
Dr.
Initially
So
that.
and so knows my desires around incapacity. Yeah.
Yes. And here's my lawyer's phone number. Here's my doctor's phone number. Here's here's whoever you need to talk. My insurance agent. These are all the people you need to talk with should something happen to me. Because I know it's a awkward, not awkward. Well, it's a bit awkward. Not awkward is the right word. Stressful. Like,
Yeah.
I've had people, like, their spouses or kids will cry in my office because they don't want to think about their parent or their spouse. But they do know, it is comforting to them to know that it has been thought of already. So they might not be ready to talk about it today, which is completely fair. But next week, when the plan's already in place, they can talk about it with me next week or next month when they're ready to go into the weeds a little bit more. But at least I know
Mhm.
where to find it, and it brings peace of mind knowing it's been done. So
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us today. I really appreciate the insight and, I want to say, taking on some of the difficult choices that we kind of want to ignore in our lives.
yes,
um, yeah, it can bring
unfortunately,
so much peace.
death
Yeah.
and taxes. We can count
Yeah,
on
unavoidable.
it. Yeah.
That's it for today's conversation. To connect with Stephen or learn more about estate and family law in Georgia, head to scriberlaw.com. If you found this helpful, take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, and share the show with someone who could use clear, trustworthy legal advice. We'll be back with more real-world advice to help you plan ahead, protect your loved ones, and move forward with confidence in the next episode.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.